Hey, good morning, Giants. And today we're going to talk about a few more vocabulary words at the beginning here. However, these first two written in black, you don't necessarily need to write down. Just make sure you listen as we talk about them here. And then the one in red and the one in purple, we will want to know what those are. But a postulate, this is just another word for an accepted statement of fact. Okay, it's something that hasn't necessarily been proven in every single situation, but the math community as a whole accepts it to be true. Okay. Now, a coordinate for this one, think the game Battleship, like A8. If I told you where that was, you guys could all find it on a Battleship board. It's a coordinate, has a number, or in that case, letters that represent the specific point. Okay. The most common example of this is the coordinate plane, in which you graph by moving left and right in the x direction and up and down in the y direction. Okay. Now, midpoint. I'm guessing many of you know this, and it's pretty clear based on its name itself, but mid is in the middle. So a midpoint is a point that divides the segment into two congruent segments. And while we're talking about congruent segments, that's just segments that have the same length. Okay. Now, when finding the midpoint, one way we can develop a formula for that, we think about it, if we have our number line and it goes from point 0 to 10. Okay, if I asked you to find the midpoint, I'm guessing lots of you could locate it, and you would know that in order to make these sides the same, which you see I put a mark on each side, that shows that they're congruent, they're the same. In order for that to be true, this would have to be a value of 5. Okay, and many of you could figure that out. 10 divided by 2 is 5. However, if we have the same length line, and it started at 2 instead of 0 on the number line, and it went all the way to 12. If we did 12 divided by 2, that'd be 6. 6 is only 4 away from 2, and it's 6 away from 12, so that's not our answer. Instead, our answer is here at 7. 7 is 5 away from 2 and 5 away from 12, so it's the midpoint. Now, in order to get it, we can simply add those two together, so 12 plus 2, and then divide by 2. 12 plus 2 is 14. Divided by 2 gives us 7. Now let's double check. Did that work? Does that method work for the first one? 10 plus 0 divided by 2. 10 plus 0 is 10. Divided by 2 is 5. All right, so what we're saying is if we add the two endpoints together, so if we do x2 plus x1, and then we just divide it by 2, that will be our formula for our midpoint. All right, so now, postulate, as we said, is an accepted statement of fact. And as we look here, the ruler postulate is simply the concept of why a ruler works, how we can measure something using a ruler. Okay, so if we're trying to measure the distance between 2 points, we can simply take the farther point to the right, the higher value, and subtract the lower value. So in our case here, we'll take x2 minus x1, and we will get AB. Notice there is no markings over it. If I want to call it segment AB, I put the markings over here like this. Okay, if I want it to be line AB, remember I put the arrows on each side like that. If there's no marking over that, that is simply saying the distance from A to B. Okay, so this right here with no markings means how far is it from A to B. So now, using this concept of a ruler, we look down here at this first one, and it's part of a ruler in centimeters. Now, some of you might be thinking, if I asked how far is it from A to B, that the answer is pretty obvious. It's 4.5, because that's where it is. But if you notice, it starts at 1. So we don't want to count that. That's like if I asked how tall you were and then I measured you when you were standing on a desk, right? That gives you an extra 2.5 feet. That's not going to be accurate. Okay, so we can take 4.5 and then minus that 1, and we'll be left with 3.5 centimeters. Okay, so now on this next one here, it says draw the following on the number line. The coordinate S is at -4. So we go here to -4, and we put S. The coordinate T is at 8. So there's T. Coordinate U is at 10. And then the coordinate V is at 12. Now it asks what is ST. So once again, ST, it doesn't have any marking over it. So it's saying how far is it from S to T. Now you have a couple options here. If you want to, you can just count it. I don't care. On this one, it's pretty easy. We could count that over from S to T. That'd give us our answer. However, sometimes it might not be as easy. And so instead of counting, we want to learn the method, which we have right here. So let's take x2 minus x1, and we'll get it. So x2 represents the farthest to the right. So of S or T, T is farther to the right. So we will take 8. Now we're going to subtract whatever x1 is, which in our case here is -4. So minus -4. Now, right here, anytime we have minus and negative, I like to write it like this and just kind of turn it into plus plus. I know that has 2 plus signs, but that allows me to remember, oh yeah, I subtracted a negative. And 8 and 4 together gives us 12 as our distance from S to T. Now, if you'd wanted to count it, you would have got the same thing. But this method will work even if that was massive and you didn't want to count. Say that you had -4 and 236. That'd be a lot of work to count all that. Okay, but if we use this method, you can just get the answer quickly. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about, and for this, I'm going to try to make this bigger here. Okay, so as you guys take a look at me, the segment addition postulate is saying if we have a segment broken into multiple parts, the 2 smaller parts will add together to give us the length of the big part. Now, my example for that, if I'm trying to measure my arm and I measure from my elbow to my shoulder, and I find that that has a measure of 12 inches, and then I measure from my wrist to my elbow and find that that has a measure of 11 inches. How far then is it from my shoulder all the way to my wrist? And hopefully you can figure out if this part is 12 and this part is 11, that means 12 plus 11, the whole thing is 23. Okay? So in the same way, when we're dealing with segments, if we look here, if we have AB, this first part, and BC is the second part, then the distance of those two added together will be the distance from A to C. So we look here now, and it says find JL. So JL would be the whole distance here. And if JK is 19 and KL is 48, all we have to do on this is add those two together. And we're going to do 19 plus 48, and we'll get 67 as our answer. Now, be careful because the next one is slightly different here. On the next one, it says find QR. QR is this chunk in here. We're saying 35 plus what gives us 60. So some of you are going to notice we can just subtract that and find what's missing. That works. The other option, if I plug in an x there, do 35 plus x equals 60, and I'll subtract the 35, just like many of you probably noticed. If I subtract that and get x equals 25, okay, and that will be my answer to that question. Now this next one asks us to set up the segment addition postulate, okay. It tells us to draw and label. So the first thing we're going to do is says let E be between F and G. So we don't know exactly what our picture looks like, but we know we have some sort of segment here, and F and G are on the ends, and E is somewhere between. Now, think about it. Between does not have to be in the middle. They could be the same, but it does not have to be. It's just somewhere along this path between F and G. Now, we're going to go ahead and label it. So FE here, we know is 8x minus 3. EG is 12x minus 5. And the whole thing here is 112. So I would recommend drawing this picture and solving with this, because you are definitely going to have to draw pictures like this on your test. Okay, now, as we're doing it, we know, just like my arm, we can add this part plus this part and get the whole thing. So in our case, we'll add this with this to get 112. So let's go ahead and solve this. 8x minus 3 plus 12x minus 5 equals 112. Now we need to combine our like terms, so the x's go together. 8 plus 12 gives us 20x. And then negative 3 here and negative 5 gives us negative 8. And all that equals 112. Let's add the 8 over. And we get 20x equals 120. And our final step, divide by 20, divide by 20. We get x equals 6. Okay? Now, that's all we have to do, and we're done. If it had asked us to find what the distance of FE is, we would then plug that back in. But in this case, it just asked us to solve for x right here. Now, our final thing we want to talk about is using the midpoint. Okay? So Q is the midpoint of PR. So let's start by drawing a picture here. And if Q is the midpoint, we know it is exactly in the middle. That means that on each side, the distance is the same. So I can put these marks to show they are the same. And Q is in the middle between P and R. Okay, so now we need to label it. And PQ right here, 6x minus 7. QR is 5x. Oops, let me fix that. 5x plus 1. Now, we can set those two equal to each other because if this is the midpoint, those two are the same. The only way for Q to be the midpoint is if each side is exactly the same. So my equation, whenever we're dealing with the midpoint, we know we can set the two sides equal to each other. Now from here, there's a couple ways we can solve it, a couple things we can do, but just add the 7. No matter how you solve it, you get the same answer. There's a couple different orders that we can do it. 6x equals 5x plus 8. Subtract the 5x. And we get x equals 8. And we're not done, because notice over here, it says draw and label the figure, then find PQ. We found what x is. We need to plug that in here for x to find what PQ is. So let's go ahead, let's go ahead and, let me change the color. Okay, plug that in, so 6 times 8 minus 7. 6 times 8 is 48, so minus 7 gives us 41, and that is the length from P to Q. Right here, that is our answer for PQ. Now, on letter B, it says using the figure from A, so from up here, find QR. QR is this side. Two options. You can plug it in here. 5 times 8 is 40, plus 1 is 41. Or you should have already known that these two were the same because this is the midpoint, Q, so both sides are the same here. So we know it will also be 41. And now our final one, it says using this figure, find what PR is from P to R. Has to be those two added together, so 41 plus 41 gives us 82. All right, that's all I got for you today. Go ahead and sign into Delta Math and complete that for us, please. And please let me know if you need any help. Thanks.